On debate, Senator Gerba. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Honourable colleagues, it is a privilege to address you as the sponsor of Bill C-282, which would amend the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development Act. This bill deals with a policy that was implemented in Canada a half-century ago, a policy that applies in every region of our country and one that has served Canadians well. The policy I'm referring to is supply management. I applaud the work done by Luc Thériault, the Member of Parliament for Montcalm, who introduced Bill C-282.
I consulted broadly and thought carefully before agreeing to sponsor this bill in the Senate. I finally agreed for 3 reasons. First, this bill addresses Canadians' need for reliable and sustainable supplies of food in all its forms, including healthy foods. This bill is also about the needs of our farmers who produce our food. I will return to this point a little later. Second reason, the bill is about taking into account the changes that are irrevocably transforming the vast agricultural economy. For instance, I'm thinking of climate change, which is dramatically affecting global agricultural production. It is also a matter of applying the concept, if not the duty, of ensuring food security. This duty has recently become policy, the most notable being India's decision to prohibit rice exports, to meet the needs of its 1.4 billion inhabitants. It is worth noting that India is the largest rice exporter in the world. Yes, these policies run contrary to the idea of the free market. They are based on a different kind of reasoning, on other values that relate to the theory and reality of food security. Lastly, I would like to remind you of Russia's outrageous use of agricultural products as weapons of war in its invasion of Ukraine. An outrageous use that threatens the already fragile food security of many African nations. Thirdly, my decision to sponsor this bill was influenced by the overwhelming support it received in the other place in June, where 262 voted yea and 51 nay. This endorsement amounted to nearly 80% of almost all MPs and included the 4 party leaders. MPs have, on a few previous occasions, expressed strong backing for supply management. While various trade agreements were being negotiated, a number of motions to protect the supply management system received unanimous support. In addition, it is worth noting that Bill C-282 is the second attempt to legislate in this regard. In 2021, Bill C-216 died on the order paper after passing second reading and referral to committee on a vote of 250 yeas to 80 nays. I would also like to applaud the work done at the time by Louis Plamondon, Member of Parliament for Bécancour Nicolet Sorel, who sponsored that bill. While I was preparing this speech, I recalled a story from my career as an entrepreneur. I would like to share it with you in this chamber. At the time, I was working closely with women producers of shea butter in Burkina Faso. These valuable partners provided me with the raw materials I needed to manufacture a range of body care products in Canada. We worked in a very transparent way with women who had come together to form a producer cooperative. They received a fair and equitable price for the fruits of their labor. Thanks to the fair trade system that we implemented, these women could easily meet theirs and their families' needs. They were able to send their children to school. What's more, they were contributing to the local economy and supporting the development of their communities. This partnership also enabled them to gain new skills and deliver products that met very high-quality standards. That was how we enabled these women to become the very first in the world to obtain an organic certification for their shea butter, which added value to their products, more than doubling the per kilogram sale price. Essentially, Bill C-282 would preserve a system, supply management, that offers Canada many benefits similar to those the women farmers of Burkina Faso received at a smaller scale. I recognize and I respect the arguments on the issue of supply management by those in this chamber who have a different view from my own. However, I believe that the food security of Canadians is an essential and primary goal. I would even call it a value or a duty of our country. As a result, it is non-negotiable, which means it must enjoy strong and lasting protection. From this perspective, we must carefully examine Canadians' food needs, and we must protect what needs protecting in light of current climatic, economic, and trade systems. The issue of supply management goes beyond solely financial and economic considerations, which I agree are important, but which are no substitutes for Canadians' food security and food supply requirements, the safety of that food, and the impacts of producing it on every part of the country, especially rural areas. This mode of production and protection helps maintain settlements, keep those communities viable and prosperous, and retain their private and public services. Furthermore, supply management provides our country's huge agriculture and agri-food sectors with features that ensure stability, predictability, and a robust level of investment in research and development. Finally, in this time of major climate change that will unfortunately disrupt farming around the world, it guarantees Canada a sure supply of essential foods whose quality can be and is verified. Supply management is little known and poorly understood, but it has been central to our agricultural production for over 50 years. It regulates the prices of 3 key products: eggs, including hatching eggs, dairy products, and poultry. These three supply-managed industries employ nearly 350,000 people, contribute some $30 billion to Canada's GDP, and generate $7 billion in tax revenues. More specifically, supply management covers 125,000 workers in Ontario, 115,000 in Quebec, 90,000 in the Western provinces, and 20,000 in the Atlantic provinces. As I mentioned earlier, this makes it a truly national system. The supply management system is built on three pillars that enable it to function. The first pillar is effective management of supply. In the dairy industry, for example, research on consumer demand is conducted regularly and used to issue production quota. The Canadian Dairy Commission distributes quota to the provinces, which then sell it to their farmers. The second pillar is true price controls. A price floor and a price ceiling are set. Prices are then allowed to float freely within this framework. Lastly, the third pillar is import controls. By imposing appropriate customs duties, the system regulates the quantity of supply-managed products entering the country. This trio of measures, both simple and effective, makes supply management a system that benefits Canadians in several ways. First, it benefits farmers themselves. Under supply management, farmers are guaranteed fair and equitable compensation for their work. The reliability of this compensation protects their businesses and enables them to invest in applied research. Second, it makes investment in modern, very costly equipment possible. Today, that means highly computerized equipment. Tomorrow, that might mean equipment with artificial intelligence. And finally, it fosters investment in industry governance based on standards developed by the private or cooperative sectors. Without this capacity, our agriculture sector would be seriously threatened. It would be threatened by the European Union's agricultural policy and its three heavily funded programs: the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, the European Agricultural Guarantee Fund, and the Agri-Environmental Practices Payment Fund, which, according to a recent edition of the Quebec newspaper Le Devoir, has benefited nearly 3,000 French farm businesses in its first 2 years. According to France's National Strategic Plan for the 2023-2027 Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP, 90% of large and medium-sized farms will receive a subsidy worth 21% of their revenues, and about half of them would show losses without this significant support. Left to its own devices, our agricultural sector would also be threatened by the agricultural prices of our large neighbor to the south, which, as the OECD notes, provides continued strong support for farm incomes. Agricultural production in these two enormous economies is protected. It is highly subsidized and sheltered from risks. Is it reasonable to measure ourselves against these two giants as regards key staples? I would add that our supply management policy clearly costs us less than the agricultural policies of our colossal neighbor and the 27 countries of the EU, to say nothing of Chinese and Indian policies in this area. Another major advantage of our supply management policy is that it enables our farmers to operate domestically over the long haul. As I pointed out earlier, This longevity ensures the viability and prosperity of our outlying regions. These regions greatly benefit from these employment generators, which add vitality and support local economic activity. Conversely, when farm businesses shut down, these regions suffer serious consequences, particularly those located far from major urban centers. If supply management were to end, an estimated 80,000 jobs would be directly affected. All this means that strong farms go hand in hand with regional development. The two are bound together. The COVID-19 health crisis made us realize that offshoring our production was a disaster. It shone a harsh light on previously unimaginable ways in which we depend on others. It showed the critical need to build resilient local supply chains for essential common needs like healthcare, education, transportation, communication, security, and food. Supply management protects us by keeping our most essential foods under our rules and our control, particularly as regards food safety. For instance, in the poultry industry, a food safety program called Raised by a Canadian Farmer has been launched. This program is now mandatory in every province, and 100% of Canadian chicken producers are now certified. Supply management guarantees not only that we can buy high-quality products, but also that they meet our animal husbandry and animal welfare standards. What is more, by bringing our farmers closer to consumers, supply management helps us meet our environmental objectives. Shortening our supply chains is an inexpensive and effective way of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG emissions. According to a recent United Nations Food and Agriculture report, the supply chain is quickly becoming one of the main drivers of GHG emissions from the agri-food system in many countries. Of these 16.5 billion tons of GHG emissions generated by global agri-food systems in 2019, 5.8 billion tons were the result of activities along the supply chain. Simply put, supply management contributes a great deal to our efforts to fight climate warming. By protecting farms in Canada, supply management helps preserve a valuable agricultural ecosystem that is undergoing dramatic change. Over the past 20 years, Canada has lost the equivalent of 7 farms per day. This decline is mainly occurring among farms that are not covered by supply management, and it goes hand in hand with a concentration of arable land under the ownership of large conglomerates, jeopardizing the Canadian model of family farms. Between 2001 and 2021, the number of farms in Canada fell by 23%, but the remaining farms increased in size. They went from an average of 274 hectares in 2001 to an average of 327 hectares in 2021. This trend is even more striking when compared with the situation in our neighbor to the south. Canada still has 22 egg-producing farms, while the United States is down to only a few. A single one of them could meet the demand for eggs for the entire province of Quebec. This process of concentration is weakening supply management. The diversity of farms in Canada is a major asset. In addition to maintaining the settlement and use of rural lands, as I explained earlier, it also protects the Canadian food supply from various risks. The most recent one was the avian flu. That disease had a major impact in the United States, especially by driving up prices, but our diverse farms protected Canadian consumers. Clearly, then, supply management benefits consumers. By maintaining prices at fair levels for the entire value chain, Canadians are guaranteed not to face shortages. In addition, the system protects them from major untimely price spikes, which would otherwise be beyond our control. Prices in an unregulated market are inherently very volatile, in part because of extreme weather events, which are increasingly frequent owing to climate change. Lastly, thanks to supply management, farmers do not need to rely on government support programs or subsidies to survive. As a result, supply management can be considered a kind of insurance policy for the consumer. It helps protect the livelihoods of farmers by ensuring they receive stable incomes, but it also provides a consistent supply of food to consumers. This is a win-win partnership. Like most in this chamber, I am unquestionably a strong supporter of the market economy. However, I believe we must consider the context and unique characteristics of certain essential industries, which must be protected and kept out of harmful turmoil. Yet, despite the clear and tangible benefits of supply management for Canada, supply management remains under threat. And to answer the question, why put supply management into a bill? I would say that recent free trade agreements have repeatedly undermined supply management. They have gradually reduced its scope. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, and the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, have all punched holes in the supply management system. Under CETA, for example, the quota for European cheese imports was raised to 16,000 tons per year. As a result, small Canadian producers are facing a much more fragile future. More specifically, they had to cut production, which in turn reduces sales for dairy farmers. As for CUSMA, it opened up nearly 4% more access to the Canadian market. Yes, the producers affected have obtained government compensation to make up for these breaches in the supply management system. However, these payments have proven not only inadequate, but also very costly for Canadian taxpayers. To offset the losses that CETA caused, in the dairy industry alone, the government spent $250 million. If the supply management system functions very effectively without taxpayer support, why dismantle it? Only to then subsidize the affected producers. It makes no sense. Honorable colleagues, Bill C-282 would safeguard the supply management system. The bill is very simple. By amending the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Development Act, it enshrines the system by including it in the minister's responsibilities. To do so, it adds supply management to Section 10 of the Act. In the list of instructions the minister must take into account in conducting the external affairs of Canada, including the negotiation of free trade agreements. Under the bill, the minister responsible for international trade would have to refrain from undermining the supply management system, which could no longer be used as a bargaining chip. Having been taken off the table in international negotiations, supply management would be preserved for the long run. Some of our global partners were unable to defend their equivalent of our supply management system, and they are paying a dear price for it today. In Australia, for example, abandoning the system in the 2000s profoundly changed the country's dairy industry, and its farms were forced to make the transition. Farmers fought hard to compete with international milk prices, but failed. Australian producers were earning a price per litre of milk below the global average. In the span of 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, the number of dairy producers fell from 22,000 to less than 6,000. It was a disaster. Since then, exports have steadily fallen while imports rise. An increasingly large share of dairy processing is being done by foreign companies. In the European Union, the end of the Common Framework launched the beginning of the industrial management of milk production. In France, for instance, it is very difficult to support and encourage small-scale markets and local farmers. In the Picardie region in northern France, 35% of dairy farms disappeared between 2000 and 2010. Honorable Senators, supply management is akin to a shield. It protects Canadians from shortages and brutal swings in prices. It fights climate change by shortening supply chains. And it ensures an appropriate income for our dairy, egg, and poultry farmers. It defends our outlying regions against social and economic desertification and secures tens of thousands of jobs. Finally, it puts safe, high-quality food on our plates. Honorable colleagues, we are at a crossroads, and the following questions should guide your decision-making. How do we want to treat our farmers? Do we prefer competitiveness at all costs, or a resilient, local, and sustainable food system? How do we want to feed Canadians? How do we want to treat our farm animals? How important is food sovereignty to us? These crucial questions are central to our policy of supply management. When I began working with the women of Burkina Faso that I spoke about earlier, I immediately noticed the virtuous circle that we had created. If developing countries benefit from this form of commerce, then developed nations such as Canada can too. I am convinced that Canada can establish principled and regulated free trade that will preserve its reputation as a responsible trading nation while keeping its supply management system intact. In closing, I should mention that before it was introduced in the House of Commons, this bill underwent an outside legal review that confirmed that it does not impinge on the privileges of the Crown. Therefore, I ask that you vote in favor of referring Bill C-282 to the committee as soon as possible for its consideration with a sober second thought, which I hope will be quick and favorable. Thank you for your attention.